So in this video, we're going to be going over probability and genetics. So there's a couple of rules first we have to know when we're trying to understand probability within the scope of genetics. So first we have the product rule, which states that for independent events x and y, the probability of them both occurring at the same time is the probability of x times the probability of y. So if you took a basic statistics course, this probably would have been introduced in there too. But we're gonna be applying this to genetics and basically, like the offspring of a certain type of parent. So let's actually do an example to describe the product rule. So the example says that for a cross between two heterozygous individuals, what are the odds of getting a homozygous recessive individual? So first thing you would do is actually make a cross, right? Make a monohybrid cross. We get A. Now when we cross this, we get the offspring capital A, heterozygous dominant right here, lower homozygous recessive. So the question is asking, what are the odds of getting a homozygous recessive individual? And based off of this monohybrid cross, right here, it's lowercase, so it's 1/4, right? 1/4 chance of making a homozygous individual. But we have to take into account that each parent has a 1/2 chance, right? 1/2 chance of actually making this offspring, right? So there's 1/2 chance that this is actually going to be given to the offspring. There's a 1/2 chance that this allele is actually given to the offspring. So there's two ways to approach this problem. One way is just looking at all of the offspring, right, and counting up how many homozygous recessive individuals there are. Or you can look at the parents and see what are the odds of each allele, right, actually occurring in the offspring. So if we look at just the offspring, we see that there's only one homozygous recessive individual, so it's 1 out of 4, right? So probability of AA is 1 out of 4, right? Let's say if we approach the question the other way, where we look at the parents. So there's a 1/2 chance of getting this allele, 1/2 chance of getting this allele. If you multiply the two independent events, so 1/2 times 1/2 is equal to 1/4, and we still get the same answer. So there's two ways to approach this problem, but the second way actually applies the product rule, while the first way just looks at the offspring and determines the odds from there. So the second question is, the second rule is the sum rule, which states for mutually exclusive events x and y, the probability that one will occur, x or y, is the probability of x plus probability of y. So the example right here is for a cross between two heterozygous individuals. What is the probability of getting a dominant genotype, right? And a dominant genotype refers to either a heterozygous dominant or a homozygous dominant. Let's do this cross again. So first thing we have to do a cross, monohybrid cross. So AA. So when we do this cross, we get, since it's between two heterozygous individuals, we obviously know it's going to be a 3-to-1 ratio, right? And when we look at this, right here, So there's basically three events that can really lead to a dominant phenotype. So this is gonna, so for one way is that there's one dominant allele coming from the father, one from the mother, that gives us a homozygous dominant. Or it could be one dominant from the mother and a recessive from the father, right? So 1, 2. Or it could be a dominant allele from the father and a recessive allele from the mother, giving us this offspring. So these are the three ways of getting the dominant phenotype. And to actually find the total probability of getting all three of these phenotypes, these genotypes, all we have to do is add up the probability of each of these three events happening, right? So let me write it down actually. The first event I said was that 1A allele from mom plus 1A allele from dad, or it could be 1A allele from mom plus 1 lowercase a allele from dad, giving us a heterozygote. 3, 1 so 1 lowercase allele from mom plus 1 capital allele from dad, right, giving us another heterozygote. So each of these events, the probability of each of these events happening is 1/4, right? Since there are 4 total offspring, 1 of each happening. So we have to do 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, giving us a probability of 3/4. So this is how you apply the sum rule. And the sum rule is usually kind of seen in probability involving genetics, but it's usually the product rule that really has a major part in the probability questions in genetics. Now moving on, we can actually apply these rules to dihybrid crosses as well. So here's this example, which states we breed 2 dogs with genotypes capital B, lowercase b, capital C, lowercase c. How can we predict the number of capital B, lowercase b, capital C, lowercase c puppies among the offspring? So the first thing you might think is to draw out a dihybrid cross, right? So that is not the way to go. You don't want to continuously draw a giant 16 square Punnett square. So what you want to do is actually split this question into two different questions. So what's the probability of getting a capital B, lowercase b genotype? And the second question is, what's the probability of getting a capital C, lowercase c genotype? So we're going to be splitting this question into 2 different monohybrid crosses, right? Because since a dihybrid cross is comprised of 2 different traits, we can split this dihybrid cross into 2 different monohybrid crosses. So what we want to do is first look at the probability of heterozygous for the B allele. So let's cross BB with BB. So the first question right here says that what's the probability of getting a heterozygous B genotype when we cross two heterozygous dogs. So that probability right here is 2 out of 4, right? There's two total heterozygotes when we cross the parents for this certain allele. Now, if you do another cross for the second trait, we get this again. We get 2 out of 4 again, right? So over here it's 2 out of 4, 2 out of 4. So 2 out of 4 chance of getting a heterozygous version of this allele, right? And 2 out of 4 chance of getting a heterozygous version of this allele. So when we're trying to find the total probability, we apply the product rule, right? What is the probability of both of these events happening at the same time? So we want to multiply. So we want to multiply the probability of BB times the probability of CC. And we already know 2/4 can be simplified to 1/2. 2/4 can be simplified to 1/2. So what we're basically multiplying is 1/2 times 1/2. And it gives us a probability of 1/4. So there's a 1/4 chance, 1/4 of the offspring, right? The probability of the offspring to have this genotype, heterozygous for both traits. So this is how you basically apply the product rule to dihybrid crosses, and this is how you should apply it when you're doing dihybrid crosses, since dihybrid crosses are very long, and especially during an exam, you don't want to draw out a whole dihybrid cross and count up each of the alleles that look like this, or right. You don't want to do that. You want to save time by splitting up the cross into 2 crosses, and then finding the probability of each happening at the same time. So let's do a bunch of examples now. So the first question is saying polydactyly is expressed when an individual has extra fingers and or toes. Assume that a man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each hand, each foot, marries a woman with normal number of digits. Having extra digit is caused by a dominant allele. The couple has a son with normal hands and feet, but the couple's second child has extra digits. What is the probability that their next child will have polydactyly? So first things first, let's point out which alleles are dominant, which alleles are recessive. So capital P is equal to the polydactyly allele. Lowercase p is normal, right? Normal allele. So the question is saying that a man with that condition is crossed with marries a woman with a normal allele, right? So that would look like the man could either be capital B, capital P, or he could be capital P, lowercase p, right? Since both of these give a dominant phenotype. Now the woman we know is normal, right? So she's recessive for the normal allele. So we have to write PP, lowercase p, lowercase p. But we still have the question, like, what is the genotype of the father, right? The man. So what we have to do is just test both of these genotypes, right, with this. So this is kind of going back to the basics of Mendelian genetics video where we talked about the test cross, right? So let's do a test cross where we're going to cross capital P times lowercase p. When we do this cross, so lowercase p, capital P. When we do this cross, we get all heterozygotes, right? We get 100% heterozygotes, and 100% of the offspring have the condition, right? Have the polydactyly condition. Now let's say if we cross heterozygous times homozygous recessive, so when we do this, we get capital P, lowercase p, capital P, lowercase p. So when we cross a heterozygote times a homozygous recessive, we get a 1-to-1 ratio, and 50% are polydactyly, and 50% are normal. So when we look at what the question's asking, it says that the couple has a son with normal hands and feet, but the couple's second child has extra digits. What is the probability that their next child will have polydactyly? Since the couple had children with that are both normal and children that have the condition polydactyly, we can assume that the genotype of the father is heterozygous, right? Heterozygous. Since in the heterozygous cross, we have both normal offspring and we have offspring with the affected allele. So since now we know both genotypes, now we can use this cross right here that we already made, right? We can forget about this cross since this is not applicable to this problem, to this example. We use this cross and we look at the probability of offspring having polydactyly, right? So there's 4 total offspring. And we have 2 out of 4 that have the condition polydactyly. So in total, there's 2 out of 4, right? We can simplify it to 1/2. So there's a 1/2 chance the next child will be polydactyly. So this is this question. This involves a lot of monohybrid cross. You should have a really good knowledge of monohybrid crosses, a really good knowledge of basically logical reasoning, and those ratios, right? Like the 3-to-1 ratio, 1-to-1 ratio, 100% ratio. You should have an idea of those when you're solving these problems. So moving on to the next question. Tightly curled or woolly hair is caused by a dominant allele, by a dominant gene in humans. If a heterozygous curly-haired person marries a person with straight hair, what percentage of their offspring would be expected to have straight hair? First thing first, let's point out which alleles are dominant, which alleles are recessive. So curly hair is capital and dominant. Straight hair is recessive, right? Lowercase and recessive. So it says that a heterozygous curly-haired person marries a person with straight hair, right? So the person with straight hair is obviously a homozygote, since for straight hair, we need 2 recessive alleles. And what percentage of the offspring are expected to have straight hair? So we're crossing heterozygous curly times homozygous straight. So when we cross this, we get C, 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 C. So when we do this monohybrid cross, and I did this quick because I'm assuming you guys know how to do monohybrid crosses. So we see that 50% of the offspring are curly-haired heterozygotes, and 50% are homozygous straight hair, right? So the question is asking what percentage of the offspring would be expected to have straight hair, and that's obviously 2 out of 4, 1/2. So the probability is 1/2 of the offspring are expected to have straight hair.